Brilliant. So thank you, everybody. I mean, yeah, developing a strategy voice, I think, is really challenging for any media organization. We all know, though, however, given how important it is, right, given the adoption of smart speakers and voice technology in general. So I want to give you a bit of a reflection of our efforts so far, the approach and challenges that we faced, and also an outlook of where we're heading. Now, to kind of start us off, let's set a bit of a vision. So we always look into what's the world going to look like in the future. And we think that by like 2025, let's see if that's about right, we'll kind of expect this ubiquitous ambient human-computer interaction happening predominantly through voice on kind of like any device and any location. We will, within that, I think the users will expect media to be both ever more personalized and present in our lives and come from a wider range of sources, right? Dominic, you mentioned this whole kind of like TV remote thing kind of like coming. I mean, I see it with my kids, that's how they talk to a TV. Now, within this kind of like world, the other aspect as well, we think, is that trust will become really more increasingly important and increasingly difficult to establish. Now, if that's the vision, and if we kind of reflect on the current landscape that we have, there's things that we need to be able to do as the BBC, in particular, giving our kind of like public service remit. But there are some challenges that we're facing when we're actually working and integrating against certain platforms. So, for example, we need to receive prominence. However, on platforms, we see that they'd like to monetize that prominence. So that is kind of like really in conflict into kind of like our remit. We need to exert what we refer to as editorial control over our content. So this is kind of like making sure that we know when and what content is being played and what kind of surrounds it. But we see on platforms that they want to be very selective of what they can pick and choose and actually present to their users. We need to receive attribution, right? So this is that us knowing that the user credits us as the source. However, what we've seen on platforms, and this is really interesting, we did some research where we asked people, it's kind of like, where do they get the news from these days? And their answer is, well, we get it from Facebook, right? I get it through WhatsApp. So they're reflecting the platform or attributing the platform rather than the actual source underneath it. We also, according to our charter, need to deliver technical quality and also innovation. But we found that within the platforms, we're really hamstrung by the features that they kind of like provide to us. We also need to receive user data, so we know how our audience is talking to us. But then on the other side, in the platforms, they own that data. So with that landscape, what we've kind of seen is we wanted to really build out what we refer to as a conversation as a service platform to enable conversational interfaces really across our products. Now, we see this important because it enables us to have a consistent experience across various different platforms. It drives our operational cost efficiency, and it really is a consistent use of conversational capabilities in our product. So let me just run through a really high-level pipeline. I'm not going to go into the detail because I think a lot of people here know these. Now, we want to be able to answer this kind of like question across a various numbers of different integration and distribution points. So let's say we're on a PC, right? On Windows, you can actually now start to have your own kind of like web word. So we need that kind of technology. You then look at these various different, your mobiles, your tablets, again, the smart TV that I won't mention, but we're also seeing a lot more kind of like happening in particular in the in-car space, where you need really strong kind of like speech-text capabilities. Next part along, we have our natural understanding. So how do we understand what the user actually is asking us to do? That's the kind of integration point that you tend to see on the Google Assistant, as well as where your chatbots kind of can come in. Underneath that, we refer to it as dialogue management. So this is kind of like, how do I then hand over, once I know what the user wants, back to our back-end system? And that's kind of where we, on the Alexa side, kind of do our integration. And all of that, you then need to respond, right? You want to play your audio, your video, or you actually want to render your SSML. So we started off very much looking at a bots kind of like skills-based architecture, but we very, very quickly realized that that was very challenging, right? To enable a consistent experience across various different domains, right? So if, for example, if I want to go from sports to news and vice versa, it's really difficult if you run that through various different experiences. So the big change that we've done is that we've introduced this layered architecture, and in particular, this notion of a dialogue manager and this kind of like interaction pattern, we kind of refer to it. So this allows us to really specialize expertise and kind of like responsibility across this whole kind of like architecture that you see here. If you want to read more about similar architectures, I recommend looking up Amora from Emory University or Alana from Heriot-Watt University. They're both past winners of the Alexa Prize for social chat, and it's really good. I mean, it was a good kind of like confirmation that those kind of architectures in larger systems seems to be what's happening. Now, having this kind of architecture, we need to kind of like figure out how am I going to get this into my organizations, right? You might think, well, just a bunch of development kits that should do it. Unfortunately for us, we saw we really need to provide ASR both as a running instance, but then also provide our own kind of like models for how we train it. So for ASR, it was important that we understand all of our regional accents that we have in the UK. For the NLU is very much all of our very specific station names. You then need to figure out how do I get that engagement going really into the various different products that might use it, how do I provide training materials. And I think one thing we've done really quite right is that we always had this cross-functional teams of UX, editorial, product, technical, and project management to really make sure that we look at it from all the various different angles. And once you have this part, how do I actually operate and support this? So we started back in 2017. Yes, I actually came and talked in 2018 at All About Voice. Back then, I mentioned kind of like our BBC skill. So this currently runs at roughly 2 million weekly users. We also had released our Kid skill, which we won a bunch of awards for, which is really kind of like games, stories, and songs from our Care Children's brand. We trialed some work doing the interactive news on Google Assistant for the Indian election, which we then released in 2019. And we're currently running at roughly 335,000 weekly users, so it's an interactive kind of news experience. We did trial an assistant approach in last June that was on Windows. However, given the kind of like current circumstances in the world, we made some reprioritization decision that for the moment we're not going to pursue that particular angle. However, the tech allowed us to do a number of things. So we built a Corona bot that was actually literally around this time last year, which was released on Facebook to answer a question about Corona. This particular effort had some really key goals. So how do we kind of really show our public service purpose, right? How do you respond really quickly to the most pressing and frequently asked questions? I mean, I remember the types of questions I was constantly looking at the websites to see what was actually going on. It helped us to really understand what it takes to build and maintain a growing single topic knowledge base, and also looked at interoperability. I mean, we released it on Facebook, but we were also kind of like doing internal trials for like Slack integration and all of this. And that seemed to actually work quite nicely. It was built on our existing Q&A capability. We have some internal tooling to do this. And we worked very, very closely with the NHS. So our editorial team and the NHS team would kind of like sit together daily to really look into what's the right what do we need to update on our knowledge base and actually push that live. And I think if you look at some of the actual blurbs here, you can also see how robust the kind of like speech recognition was that we put in place. The next thing was the development of our synthetic voice, which, as we heard from Eleanor, is really key for kind of like brand identity, and completely agree with that. So we're also testing how we read this out on articles, and what we're trying right now is to see how we can mix kind of like positive and kind of like serious styles within kind of like whilst reading an article. So let me just go and play it.
Skylab, the myth of the mutiny in space. It's been almost half a century since the 3 astronauts on board the Skylab 4 space mission famously fell out with mission control. Soon afterwards, reports began to circulate that they went on strike. But Ed Gibson, the only one of the crew still alive, says the idea that they stopped work is a myth.
Right, so Eleanor, I'm looking forward to your critique. The other thing that we're doing is that we're looking to really how do we support our main products. So we have iPlayer, our video service, and Sounds, which are all of our audio and content, and to really see how we can use voice and conversations to help them through the various different distribution channels, as I kind of mentioned, right? If you're present on all of these, how do you then make use of voice, which are also starting to be on all of these? In particular, the in-car aspect is really something that we're looking at, because with the likes of CarPlay, Android Auto, and Android Automotive, it just becomes ever more present. And the car is a quite nice environment, right? You want to say something rather than kind of like finding things on buttons on your kind of heads-up display. The other aspect is we're looking into how we can enhance our interactive news experience. At the moment, we're doing this through kind of like extra content. So what kind of explainer can I do for particular topics? Can I show different viewpoints? For Corona, we did some supporting materials to point people to kind of like mental health awareness aspects during COVID. As mentioned, it currently has 335,000 views. We see around kind of like 60% return from previous week, which I think is really quite good. And it's on average 28 minutes that people, oh, see, Siri woke up. Oh dear. So we have 28 minutes that people kind of play a day with the experience. And then out of all, which I find is really quite interesting, so the more gets used around 75% of the time. So if a story has more, 75% of the time people actually go down the experience. Compare that only 25% use the skip really kind of like shows that people go through the experience and try out the additional content that we provide. And this kind of usage has really superseded our BBC News flash briefings, which we kind of always had. And that happened back in the fall of 2020. So where are we going next? We've co-funded a research project with Data Lab Scotland and the University of Glasgow. And this one, we're looking to really, how do we build a social, engaging, conversational experience to help audiences get the most out of the BBC? And the primary aim is, how do we blend this kind of like traditional task-based dialogue, so turn on my lights, play the radio, and kind of bots that really kind of like look at this kind of like social chit-chat, because we do have an incredibly broad content base, right? And as Dominic said, you know, content or discovery of content is king. And again, we truly believe in that as well. But if your content concludes all of this, that's a rather kind of like significant challenge to make that something that people want to engage with. Then the final thing I'm going to show is hot off the press.
Think you know football? Then go head-to-head with me, an all-knowing bot, in a new voice-controlled quiz. Test your knowledge, and climb the league table for your team. Do you have what it takes to beat the bot?
So as of yesterday, this is live on our taster, where we can kind of do experiments. Because during the COVID pandemic, we really saw the surge of these kind of like DIY Zoom quizzes. And we really were looking into, well, what does a voice quiz kind of look like? We wanted something that showcased our synthetic voice, which you just heard again. We also wanted to test out what a web-based kind of like voice quiz would look like. Is it easier to use your voice when playing games kind of like under time pressure, because there's a kind of like time pressure element with this. And it also was a really great kind of like collaboration with our team in BBC Sports. So with that, that's all. Just leave me to thank you all. And I think I'm handing over to Oz.